Hey guys, Kevin in for another installment of Own It, Never Falking Scene, continuing my reviews of the Indiana Jones films, this time looking at the 1984 sequel, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And what Indiana Jones Temple of Doom is essentially about is basically it is not a sequel, but a prequel to the events of Raiders Lost Ark. It's exactly 1 year before the events of that film. And basically, we see Indy, he is in basically North India, and he ends up coming across these villagers who basically entrust him to track down this magical stone and rescue their children from this very sort of demonic cult. And basically, he goes on a quest along with this actress and also his child companion Short Round, and they get themselves, let's just say they got themselves into a much darker and complicated situation than expected, and that's all I'm really gonna say. So once again with Indiana Jones Temple of Doom, yes, I have not seen this movie. I know, it's crazy, but after the events of Raiders Lost Ark, I was very excited to see how this film would turn out, but I also was a little bit skeptical because I've heard from most people this is easily the most divisive Indiana Jones film. I mean, sure, Kingdom of Crystal Skull you could say is, but I feel like that film is like universally panned by pretty much everyone. The Temple of Doom, on the other hand, it's kind of like a love it or hate it film. I've heard some people who love it, I heard some people who hate it, I heard some people who don't really like it, so I really did not know how this one was going to turn out, and I will say this is a good movie. It's not a great movie, but I definitely do enjoy Temple of Doom overall. It's much sillier and a lot more of just a really fun adventure than the previous film, but we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And once again, similar to the first film, that is definitely one of the best things about this movie. And obviously, in regards to Harrison Ford, he is still great here. He still does a fantastic job as Indy. Maybe he's not as wise or not as clever as he was in the first movie. He still does have a lot to learn, but you can't help but root for the guy. It makes him very relatable in that sense. You see in this film, there are some things that yeah, he is a little bit more focused on the archaeology and a little bit less focused on the humanity, and that's something I did like about him in this movie. Like, he is very focused on money and things like that, and you do see that in this movie, and I really did like getting that, but he still is a very trusted adventurer. He still is someone that you very much do root for, and he's still a badass in every scene that he's in, and I think he still does a fantastic job here. He is nowhere near as much of an arc as he does in the first movie, but I still really do enjoy his presence here. Indy is still one of the most entertaining characters I think ever to be put in Hollywood, and Ford continues to absolutely dominate as this character. But then we come to the controversial one, Kate Capshaw as the character of Willie. There have been so many things that people have said about this character, that she is annoying and that she's over the top. And look, for me, sure, is Willie annoying? Yes, but I feel like Willie is the perfect encapsulation of what would happen if you were to put an actress in this situation, because this is just a normal Broadway actress. You know, she is not used to this sort of environment. She's not used to the climate. She's not used to the stakes of the adventure. So obviously, she's going to feel a bit out of her element. I do think Capshaw does a really good job because she actually is a lot of fun. I could definitely tell Capshaw was having fun in the role. I think she definitely was very entertaining. Definitely had me laughing quite a few times. And I did think her and Indy did have some good chemistry. On the romantic front, not really, but we'll get to that in a little bit, but I do think they worked very well together. Is she as good as a character as Marion? No, but she's not supposed to be. She's not supposed to be nearly as well fleshed out. She's just supposed to be a really fun sort of female companion for Indy, and I do think she functions very well, and I think overall she did do a really good job here. I really did enjoy her in this film. And then Jonathan Quan as Short Round. Once again, a lot of people have said this kid is very annoying, and this I simply do not understand. I absolutely love this character. He, to me, is one of the better child performances out there, and he's the definition of just a really great partner for Indy. I mean, that basically is what he functions as. He's someone who's incredibly loyal. He always has his back, but he also will put up a fight. He will kick your ass if he needs to, and I really did love that about his character. He's not just some meek child who always needs saving. He does get his hands dirty a lot of times, and at times he's the wisest out of all of them. Like, there's a lot of times where he's even on a bigger intellect than Indy, and I thought he did a really great job in this movie. I really love the dynamic between these three characters. I think they work very well together, and I think that is definitely one of the best things about this film for sure. And then really the only person I do want to talk about is Amrish Puri as Molaram. Holy shit, this guy. He comes in very late into the film. This is a villain that we don't really see till literally the second act, the third act of the movie, but he makes his presence known for sure. This is one of the most evil and demonic presences I think I've seen in any film. This guy is so set on this sort of demonic cult, and he will, he's performing all these, like, human sacrifices, and he has all these, like, child slaves, and this guy is just so messed up, but he relishes so well in that role. He is a bit over the top, but I think he really does do a great job. I really do love this villain here. He was absolutely fantastic in this film. He is incredibly terrifying as well, and I really did love his role here. He also was fantastic, as well as the entire cast. I think really everyone does do a really great job in this movie. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, because once again, this film is directed by Steven Spielberg, and I think he did the right thing with this movie. The first film was so high scale and just this really fun adventure, and it was much more than that, though. It was very complex. It was sort of a story about morality versus greed, and this movie is much more simple than that. He really does go a lot more for just a fun adventure, and I think it really does succeed as that. I really did love what he does, because he did not want to make this like the first movie. And the reason he didn't want to make it like that is because they wanted this to really feel like old 1940s serials. That's really what Indiana Jones was meant to function as, and I think it works very well as that here. I thought his directing was really great. He really does rev up a lot of the fun, but he also goes a lot darker as well, and I thought those two tones were very well realized, and I thought his directing was really good there. The writing, however, is a different story, because I will say the main story of this film I very much do like. It's much more smaller scale. It's much more focused on just the interaction between the characters, and I definitely did enjoy that. I think these three work very well together. They really do have a nice rapport, and I really did enjoy just seeing them goof around. It's just from a character perspective, I really did not care that much about Willie or Short Round on an emotional level. I enjoyed their inclusion in the film. I really did. I enjoyed seeing Willie. At first, she is a bit annoying with her just complaining about not wanting to get, wet and not wanting to eat certain food, but after a while, she grew on me, and I really did think she was a lot of fun in the movie, and she works very well, like I said. It's just this diva who is not at all used to this environment and is trying to do what she can to, survive, but at the same time, she's not enjoying it. This does not get better for her, and I did enjoy that overall. It's just, for me, she doesn't really go anywhere as a character. That's really all she does throughout this movie, is complain and scream, and again, I think it works in that role because of who the character is, but she never really overcomes that fear. It's not really like she learned anything. It's not really like it starts to grow on her. She starts to find someone endearing. There's really nothing about that here, and I really did want a little bit more from her. I was really waiting for a scene towards the end where she starts to embrace it, and she starts to make the best out of a situation, but you just never really feel that. You really never feel like she really went through anything, and I was a bit disappointed with that. And look, I'm not looking for another Marion. Obviously, Marion is Marion. That's a completely different character. I just wanted someone who went through a bit more of a conclusive arc, and we don't really get that with her here. There really wasn't much more for her to do than just that, except for when they tried to get her romantically involved with Indy, which for me, this was the weakest part of the film, without a doubt. I did not for a second believe that Indy would fall for someone this easily. I mean, we saw in the movie, sure, he made some past mistakes with Marion, but I just did not believe he would fall in love with someone like Willie. Willie was someone who just seemed like a bit of an annoyance to him at first, and suddenly he started to warm up to her, and he started to appreciate it. I just did not really buy it, and it just didn't really work for me. I think that Capshaw and Ford work well together, but when you're trying to get them together romantically, it felt very forced, and it felt like the only reason they did that is because they needed a romantic interest, when honestly, I don't really think they needed to do that. I think, honestly, we did not need for them to get romantically involved. Just have her be this woman that is stuck with Indy and learns to tolerate him towards the end of the movie. We did not need them to be romantically involved, and it just didn't really work for me. I will say I did think Short Round actually went through a pretty good character transformation of someone who starts off, and sure, he is a sidekick and he is still very much tough, but he, towards the end of the movie, is kind of on equal footing with Indy, and I do think they did a really good job with that. Like I said, it's just the writing I thought was a little bit underused with the characters. But what isn't there as much in the story really does make up for it in the adventure, because they really went all out when it came to the action in this movie. They really go all out when it comes to the mystery. They really go all out when it comes to the different landscapes and the different places they can go, and I thought that was very well handled. I mean, they really did step it up in that regard, and I thought it was very well done. Unfortunately, the cinematography is something that isn't as good in this movie. I will say everything going on with like the devil worshippers and things like that, yeah, it's still terrifying. That one scene in the movie that everyone talks about, it's still just as graphic, it's still just as disturbing as it was back in 1984, and that is handled very well. But when we're seeing certain creatures and we're seeing certain designs here and there, the CGI is not really up to par. The effects just look a little bit dated, and I was quite surprised because they look so good in Raiders of the Lost Ark. It looked like that movie was made today. Temple of Doom, on the other hand, not exactly the case. Some of the effects do look a little bit dated, and they're not necessarily up to par with today's standards. But again, they work as a staple of the time, and that's even more true when it comes to the ridiculous action scenes, which, like I said, there's a lot of them. There's literally a scene of Indy and the three of them on this cliff, and basically while they are on this cliff, they go on like a raft, and the raft like goes over the cliff. Obviously, it's a lot more ridiculous, and obviously it could not happen in real life. So yes, this movie kind of throws a lot of the realism out of the window, but I think that's really what they were going for. They were going through a much more ambitious movie, and I think it does function well as that. Again, I can totally understand if someone does not enjoy it, but for me, the character and the adventure, it's just so damn entertaining that I can't help but enjoy it. I can't help but really get wrapped up in everything that was going on, and especially that last act, I think really does make up for it, because if you're not into the first act, the first two acts of this movie, which are very silly, there's a lot of ridiculous things they do go through, there's a lot of creatures they do encounter that end up being not really that much of a threat, the third act absolutely makes up for it. The last hour of this movie is pretty much a non-stop final battle sequence, and it is incredibly well done. Where they end up going with it, I really was pretty surprised by. I was surprised by how dark this movie really was as well. If you don't know, this is actually the film that basically is the main reason we have a PG-13, because people complain, they said this movie should not be PG, and this is why we have a PG-13 rating now, because of how graphic this movie really does get. I mean, especially for 1984, holy shit did they go far, and even more than I think things you would see in movies today. You simply would not see this stuff in movies today, and the fact that they did, in fact, go with that, I thought was very well handled. But like I said, the last act does get very crazy, and some of the stuff in this movie, a lot of people have said, is pretty racist with the depiction of Indians and things like that. And look, here's what I'll say. I think the movie works as a depiction of how Indians were viewed at the time. Sure, back in the day, we viewed them in a very different way, and I think we can just look back at it as this is how we thought of them then, and it is not at all a reflection of how we see them now. I think it still works in that way. Yes, it's a little dated. Yes, it is not politically correct at all, but I don't think that's what the movie was going for. I think what they're trying to go for is this is how we saw Indians back then. This is how we view them. Yes, they were very much a stereotype, but I think we could use this movie as showing how far we really have come as a society and how we don't really view them as that anymore, and I think it does work overall. It's nothing, I think, too offensive overall. I do think for the most part is well handled. In terms of the score obviously is still great. I really did love the score in this movie. Just the Indiana Jones theme in general always gets me pumped. I will say, however, this film does very much contain what might possibly be the best opening of this entire franchise. I know I haven't seen Last Crusade yet, but it's going to be very hard to top how amazing the opening is in this scene. I mean, we have this musical number, and then we get to, like, this casino scene. I mean, it's everything you could want in an Indiana Jones movie, and I think they handled it perfectly. Everything about that opening scene I just loved, and I think it perfectly set the tone for just how different and how innovative and just how ridiculous this movie was really going to be overall. And the editing. I will say I thought this movie was just a little bit slow in the second act, and that's mainly when it gets into the Indy and Willie side of things, when they're trying to get them more romantically involved. It just didn't really do much for me. But overall, I thought it was well paced. Like I said, Temple of Doom is just a really solid adventure. There just isn't really a lot to say about it because there's not nearly as much stuff that happens in this movie than there is in the first movie. This one's much more of just a standalone, and I think it does work very well as that. Ford is still very entertaining as a character. I did enjoy Willie and Short Round, despite the fact that they did not really have as much to do as the other characters in the first movie. It still is a very entertaining film overall that I'm very happy I did in fact end up watching. And I am going to give Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom overall a B. But over, guys, in my review of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, let me know what you guys thought overall. Left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.